2016 Daily Journal Annual Meeting TIMESAVER by IDP YouTube channel.
And there again, with endless money, we were unable to have people hear us. It's amazing how this high-tech stuff gets glitches. You'd think a microphone would now be totally foolproof. Well, so we have this newspaper which formerly had monopolistic qualities, and like many newspapers, it was a fine business and it required some management even so, but it was foolproof. And of course, the world changed for us as for other newspapers, and $1 million a year pre-tax is what we have left. And whether it will keep going down a little or hold there, I don't know, but I knew you were holding this stock because you want that newspaper to come back to its former glory. I suspect you developed some different rationale. What we did as we were in the same position other newspapers were in, where they were shrinking toward oblivion, was we made a lot of money out of the foreclosure boom. We had more than 80% of the foreclosure notice business. It was like being an undertaker in a plague year. Huge prosperity for us coming at a time when everybody else was in total agony. Well, that gave us a lot of money, and we used that money to buy securities at low prices during the panic, aided by that peculiar response to the deterioration of our newspaper business. We have entered this software business, and that has been a slow, expensive, troublesome thing. Now we've written off practically everything we spent on it, and we had plenty of taxable income to do that with. And what's happened is that we now have more software revenues than we have print revenues, and that business is doing way better. Now, it isn't doing better in terms of reported earnings, but on the sales field, we're just doing better and better and better because our product, we honestly believe, is way better than our main competitors. And there's an endless market for software in these public agencies. District attorneys, adoption agencies, courts. You can hardly imagine anything more sure to keep flourishing and to keep needing more and better software systems. Now, it's agony to do business with a whole bunch of public bodies and their consultants and their bureaucracies and so on. And it's such agony that a lot of big companies that are in software don't come near it. You know, if you're Microsoft, you're used to easy money. And this just looks like agony. They did buy one little business which is about half as difficult as ours. And I think it's worth more than they paid for it, but it's not a great success. So the really big boys find our niche in the software market such absolute agony that they tend to stay out of it. And I think our products are probably better than those of our main opposition, but of course our opposition has way more of the market. But nearly as I can tell, we're gaining every month. So what you people have now is sort of a venture capital operation in the software business with the tag-end remnants of the newspaper attached. And the stock may be reasonable if you like highly valued venture capital investment, but for you old-time pen and gram groupies, you're in a new territory. I'm not saying it won't work, but if it works, you don't really deserve it. All right, with that, now I'll take questions.
Two questions. One is about journal technologies and the other is about your philanthropic work. What would you like to talk about?
No, you're asking the question.
In the next year, could you tell us about one or two opportunities that you're really excited about for journal technologies? And also in the next year, what's one or two hurdles or threats that you're concerned about?
The one that I was most excited about in Daily Journal Technologies was getting the contract from the Los Angeles courts. It's one of the biggest court systems on earth. And as far as I was concerned, a crucial milestone on the task that we had chosen. You could stop and think about it. If we succeed in saturating California with a huge success, it may well spread elsewhere. So it gets to be, I mean, not, it already is elsewhere. And we bought this little nothing of a software company, people in the little valley, and is it Utah or Idaho? Utah. And it turns out that they're very good at all this service to all these clients who need it service. And we now have, how many employees? in Utah. Jerry, between 80 and 90. And how many do we have in headquarters?
Total for Charlie Technologies will be around 155. We have an office here, Logan, and in Corona, California, as a result of the acquisition of ISC 2 or 3 years ago.
And how many people in our traditional business, the newspaper?
Approximately 150.
Yeah, so we've crossed over into a new business. The new business is interesting because it's a big market. It's a big market. And I think if you ever get entrenched in it, it will be very sticky business, which has occurred to us as we suffered all this agony. At least we were suffering agonies in an attempt to get into a position from which we'd be hard to dislodge. So that's, what was the second question?
What is it, a threat or a hurdle you're concerned about?
Well, the main threat or hurdle is that we want to be the most important player in this new niche, which is a big, big niche. And of course, we're concerned about that. I don't regard that battle as won. I regard it as going well, but not won. I can go, but I'd say going very well, but not won.
I'm from Stanford University. We are very grateful that you donated the Munger building. Many of us live there. It's one of the most beautiful building campus. My question is, we heard you said that the only thing you want to know is where you're going to die, and you never go there. And it's a very powerful philosophy. And then you talk about investing, you want to stay in the circle of competence. And then a few years ago, Warren Buffett decided to buy IBM. He's still very optimistic. Some people say maybe he walked out of his circle of competence. And what is your comments about this investing?
Well, IBM is a lot like us. They had a traditional business that was very large and very sticky. And of course, the world changed. And a lot of what flourished in the new world, they were not the leader. Up came Oracle and Microsoft and all kinds of other people who were formerly not so large, and of course they didn't do well really in the personal computers, even though they well started it. IBM is in a position a lot like us, where they have an old business from which cash continues to flow, but they want a new product that's a hit. Now the product they have chosen to back is this, I call it an automated checklist. Well, an automated checklist is a very good idea. It may be particularly useful in things like medicine, but it's the kind of super market that may replace a lot of what made IBM great. And I would say the jury is out on that. I don't really have an opinion. In other words, I'm neither a believer nor a disbeliever. I regard it as a mystery. It could happen and it could not happen as far as I'm concerned. I do think the old business of IBM is very sticky and will die slowly. It's not a cinch. The truth of the matter is that at Berkshire's size, where we have to make great big bets and hold them for long periods, that's a tough game. We have to make bets that are not the kind of shooting fish in the barrel kind of bets we used to make. And that's one of them. So if you want to lighten on that one, why, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. It may work in a mediocre way, it may work big, I just don't know.
2016 Daily Journal Annual Meeting TimeSaver by IDP YouTube channel.
What advice do you give to your grandchildren? And the second question is, do you have a favorite investment story from the old days?
Regarding the grandchildren, I was not able to change my children very much. My situation reminds me of what Clarence Darrow said when he read the great poem that ended, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. Clarence Darrow said, master of my fate, he says, hell, I don't even pull an oar. That's the way I feel about changing the children. And regarding the grandchildren, thank God they're somebody else's problem. I've served my time. What was the second question? Investment stories from my younger days. Well, I tell a story I never told before. Years ago, 1962, my friend Al Marshall came to me and said, I want your help in bidding for some oil royalties. They're being put up by auction. I soon realized that under the peculiar rules of an idiot civilization, the only people who were going to bid for these oil royalties were oil royalty brokers who were a scroungy, dishonorable, cheap bunch of bastards. I realized that none of them would ever bid a fair price. And so I said, Ira, we just bid high enough to get some of these royalties. You can't possibly fail in an auction where they've excluded everybody but kind of shady, difficult, cheap bastards. So we bid for those oil royalties and we financed the thing with an oil payment. And we each put up $1,000. And for many, many years, up until the last time, the Mungers were getting $100,000 a year. 50 years later, more than 50 years later, out of $1,000 investment. The trouble with that story is it only happened once. And that's true of most good investment stories. You don't get very many. It isn't like that kind of an opportunity comes along every day. The trick in life is when you get the one or two or three that are your fair allotment for a lifetime, you got to do something about it. So that's the story. That's my story from my useful days.
How does the current energy environment compare to the early 80s when you were running Wesco? Are there any notable similarities or differences this time around?
Well, of course, we owned Wesco for a long time. What was interesting about both blue chip stamps, which control Wesco and Wesco, is that they eventually were some of the most extremely successful investments in the history of mankind. And what's interesting about those outcomes is it was only 5 or 6 transactions that carried all the freight, really heavy freight. Now that is really interesting when you stop and think about it. You try and do a zillion little acquisitions and headquarters. It's hard, but by just doing a few things over a long period of time and having them work out well, those little nothing companies were all doomed. The trading stamp business, Savings and Loan Association, savings and loans are pretty well gone, and yet they worked out fairly well. There again, just a few good decisions over a long period of time. Some great investment success once said, you make your money by the waiting. Now, that doesn't mean you sit around waiting for the next depression. You can't do that. But a fair amount of patience is required in some of these good investment records. Patience followed by pretty aggressive conduct when the time comes. Imagine sitting there having all this money rolling in from the foreclosure boom and deploying it in like one day at the bottom tick for some of those stocks. Now that was luck. And it was luck that we had caught the bottom tick. It wasn't luck that we had the money on hand when other people didn't and were willing to deploy it when other people were.
Historically, Berkshire was built around its insurance operations to provide a low-cost source of capital. What other business models did you try/consider but ultimately did not pursue?
Well, we were always opportunistic. We wanted to buy the best thing that was conveniently available that we could understand. In the early days, we thought we had a special advantage as investors in marketable securities. So we tended to look carefully at float businesses. Nowadays, of course, we've got an enormous float, and it's not much, hasn't been that much use to us, such as the nature of life. We made so much money out of those float businesses, it was obscene in the early days. And it's not a tragedy that now our float businesses don't get much advantage about the float. I mean, Berkshire's cash, which is large, is not getting much of a return. In Europe, the rates are negative. Japan, the rates are negative. So,
What do you think about the attractiveness of the average software business versus others you're familiar with, such as industrial franchising?
software-based businesses, some of them have become some of the most profitable businesses on earth. Other software companies are failing and shrinking. So it's like the rest of capitalism. It has its good spots and its bad spots. As I said, the one we're pursuing, I think, will be sticky if we succeed in it.
It seems like Journal Technologies is growing slower than some of their competitors. Why is that? And they seem to be paying very high multiples, 5 times sales. Some of the other companies for acquisitions. Would you ever consider selling Journal Technologies at a high multiple?
Well, nobody's offered us a high multiple for doing it now, and so we have had the problem or the opportunity. It's a peculiar part of the software business involving a lot of agony now for a payoff way later. You can't judge it as a normal business or as a normal roll-up of profitable companies. It's venture capital. It happens to be located in a publicly traded company. So you have a venture capital type appointment of it, and it's not venture capital that will burst into runaway success. It's venture capital, if it works, could gradually evolve into a pretty huge business. But of course, everybody's trying to evolve into a pretty huge business, and only a few will succeed. But we're not like a normal software business, and those little companies, you shouldn't call, those are not acquisitions like Berkshire Hathaway makes acquisitions. Those were not established companies that were sure to succeed and relatively foolproof. We were going to make our venture capital type assault on this peculiar part of the software market. We needed momentum from other sales forces and service operations and so forth. So we just bought them. Don't judge those things by the standards of normal corporate acquisitions. Those are part of venture capital. And if you don't like it, why you lump it.
If you were to design CEO compensation for either an insurance company or a bank, how would you do that?
Both Berkshire and the Daily Journal have our own ways of doing things, and we don't follow anybody else's established patterns. We just try and do whatever makes sense under the circumstances. Around here, we just ask Jerry to do everything. And of course, he has no budget in terms of hiring other people to help him. So that's our system here.
What are your expectations from BYD for next 10 years?
Well, we get a lot of questions on all subjects, and I suppose that one is a legitimate question. BYD has 220,000 employees. That is a big company. That too was venture capital when we went into it, we meaning Berkshire. And that company has done amazing things. I mean, the man who created that company was like the 8th son of a peasant. He went to engineering school and got a PhD, and he started off by borrowing $300,000 from the Bank of China, and somebody like that, I forget what the bank was, and going into the small batteries for cell phones and so forth, which was totally dominated by high-tech Japanese firms. And he succeeded in grabbing about a third of that market from a standing start at zero, and he won the intellectual property aspects of the litigation which followed, and that litigation happened in Japan. So it was a very remarkable man doing an almost insanely ambitious thing. And out of that, he now has 200-some thousand employees and huge lithium battery plants going in. He'll be one of the biggest lithium battery makers in the whole world very shortly. Last month, he sold 10,000 electric cars in China, which is more than Tesla sold. And of course, nobody's hardly ever heard of BYD. It's an interesting company. Berkshire doesn't do this venture capital stuff. But I hope the Daily Journal works out half as well as I expect the idea to work out. BYD is in a position on purpose to benefit from this electrification trend in the world. Very helpful to them that the people are dying on the streets of Beijing because you can't breathe the air. They have to go to electric cars in Beijing. And when they grant all these subsidies and so forth, and BYD's ahead in terms of efficient manufacture of these electric cars. So electric forklifts in this country, you really want a forklift chewing out carbon monoxide in the middle of your warehouse. I mean, so electric forklifts are a very big idea. They're very well located. So that's a very interesting venture capital investment. Now it was an accident, sort of, that Berkshire departed from its standard methods and did that one. And it's an accident that the Daily Journal is doing its version of venture capital. But I would say that I only wish our prospects were as good as BYD's. And by the way, they might be, but it's not the way to bet.
As an investor, when you value a company, what discount rate should you use, assuming the company is in your circle of confidence? I've been reading a lot, and in some books and in some people's notes from here, they say that, for example, Warren Buffett use a risk-free rate, and sometimes make some adjustment as the discount rate. And other notes I read from you is that you're going to use an opportunity cost approach, meaning that your next best investment. Which one of these is correct, or is there any way to reconcile them? Because there are three problems with
Well, they're both correct. Obviously, it's relevant what the return you get on government bonds is. That affects the value of other assets, the general climate. And obviously, your opportunity costs should govern your own investment decision making. If you happen to have a rich uncle who will sell you his business for 10% of what it's worth, you don't want to think about some other investment. Your opportunity cost is so great, considering everything else, you should forget about it. And most people don't pay enough attention to opportunity cost. Bridge players know about opportunity cost. Poker players know about opportunity cost. But American faculty members and other important people, they hardly know their ass when they play about squash.
When you try to arrive at the valuation number using the discount rate, does that mean that between the two rates, first you're going to get a
We don't use numeric formulas that way. We take into account a whole lot of factors. It's a multi-factor thing, and there are trade-offs between factors. And it's like a bridge hand. You have to think of a lot of different things at once. There's never going to be a formula that will make you rich just by going through some numerical process. If that were true, every mathematical nerd that gets A's in algebra would be rich. And that's not the way it works. But you've got to be comfortable thinking about a lot of different things at once and correctly thinking about a lot of different things at once. You have a formula that will help you. And all that stuff is relevant. Opportunity cost, of course, is crucial. And, of course, the risk-free rate is part of a factor that determines how attractive some common stock is.
Do you use the same rate for different business? For example, Coca-Cola versus an IBM?
The answer is no, of course not. Different businesses get different treatments. They all are viewed in terms of value, and they're weighed one against another. But of course, we'll pay more for a good business than for a lousy one. We really don't want any lousy businesses anymore. We used to make money by buying lousy businesses and kind of wringing money out of them. That is a painful, difficult way to make money, particularly if you're already rich. We don't do much of it anymore. Sometimes we do it by accident because one of our businesses turns lousy. And in that case, we have to, it's like dealing with your relatives. You can't get rid of them. And we deal with those as best we can, but we're not looking for new ones.
You talk about these quick cut-to-the-chase algorithms that you use. Did you arrive at that fluency only after having gone through your entire mental model checklist over a long period of time? Or is it simply a matter of, for example, knowing you're looking at a social situation and so the psychology checklist might be appropriate?
Well, if you're talking about multiple models, that means you think about many different models. And that's the nature of reality, particularly if you're an investor with a wide variety of human activities. There's no way to make that easy. Look, you all are in the business. You find it easy? Anybody who finds it easy is wrong. You're living in an illusion. It's not easy. You occasionally get an easy one, but not very many. Mostly it's hard. How many people find it hard to make good investments right now? Yeah. It's an intelligent group of people. We collect them.
I was wondering in terms of your daily habits or life habits, what you do in terms of things that most people don't to reduce these types of errors.
There are two things that Warren and I have done, and Rick Aaron has done too, to a considerable extent. One is that we spend a lot of time thinking. Our schedules are not that crowded, and we're constantly, it's a way more, we look like academics more than we look like businessmen. So our system has been to sift life for a few opportunities and seize a few of them. We don't mind long periods in which nothing happens. And Warren is exactly the same way. Warren's sitting on top of an empire now. And you look at his schedule sometime and there's a haircut. Haircut day. That's what created one of the most successful business records in history. He has a lot of time to think. And that brings me to the subject of multitasking. All you people are gotten very good at multitasking. And that would be fine if you were the chief nurse in a hospital. But as an investor, I think you're on the wrong road. Multitasking will not be the highest quality thought man is capable of doing. Juggling 2 or 3 balls at once where people come at you on their schedule, not yours, is not an ideal thinking environment. Luckily, you are so obscure that you have plenty of time to think. And I was in that position for a long time, and it helped me, and I hope it works well for you. But if it doesn't, I think you're going to have to be satisfied with life in the shallows, because if it didn't work for me, I didn't have a number 2 plan. I was not going to dance the lead in the Bolshoi Ballet or stand on the mound in Yankee Stadium or something. But I do think that the constant search for wisdom and the constant search for the right kind of temperamental reaction to opportunity, I think that'll never be obsolete. And you can apply that to your personal life too. Most of you are not going to get 5 opportunities to marry some wonderful person. In fact, most of you aren't going to get 1. You're just going to have to make do with an ordinary result. The nature of ordinary results is that they're ordinary.
Why why was Wells Fargo the one, even as a levered institution, one that you sort of thought at that time, even though other banks had failed?
That's a good question. I'll take you back one time before. When Berkshire bought into Wells Fargo, the world was coming unglued in the banking panic. And again, real estate lending had been the source of it. And Wells Fargo had been huge in real estate lending. So the stock just this is back when Berkshire bought its first Wells Fargo. Well, the answer was we knew that the lending officers at Wells Fargo were not normal bank lending officers. They had grown up, a lot of them, in the garment district. They had a cynical view of human life. They were appropriately careful. When they needed to intervene strongly, they did so because they'd learned that was the right way to run a garment lending business. They were just better. And so we knew they weren't going to lose as much money as everybody thought they were with their big real estate portfolio because they'd chosen it better and they managed it better, et cetera, et cetera. So we had an information advantage just based on general thinking and collecting data. And we weren't using it. We didn't own any Wells Fargo stock, but we were aware they had that special capacity and that their loans. Well, that gave us a big advantage, so we bought heavily. That was one. Now, number two, the Daily Journal Corporation. When the world was coming unglued, when Daily Journal bought its Wells Fargo stock, again, we knew that the bankers at Wells Fargo were more rational than ordinary bankers. It was a different kind of superiority and rationality. It wasn't this big real estate portfolio on a shrewd way of handling developers, but it was still a shrewder way of being in banking. I don't think anybody should ever buy a bank that doesn't have a feeling for how really shrewd the management is. Banking is a field where it's easy to delude yourself and report big numbers that aren't really being earned. So it's a very dangerous place for an investor. So without deep insight into banking, you should.
Two powerful mental models are the concept of specialization and the multidisciplinary approach. Do you have any advice on synthesizing these two mental models?
Well, saying you're in favor of synthesis is like saying you're in favor of reality. Synthesis is reality because we live in a world with multiple factors involved, and of course you've got to have synthesis to understand the situation when two factors are intertwined. And so, of course you want to be good at synthesis. It's easy to say you want to be good at synthesis, but it's not what the reward system of the world pays for. They want extreme specialization. And by the way, for most people, extreme specialization is the way to succeed. Most people are way better off being a chiropodist than trying to understand a little bit of all the disciplines. You know, I don't want a chiropodist that's trying to be a poet. I want somebody that really knows a lot about feet. And the rest of the world is that way. So this model of being good at synthesis across a lot of disciplines, it's very helpful to some people, but it's not the correct career advice for most people. For most people, the correct career advice is figure out some clever specialty and get very, very good at it, and get the labels the world rewards. The trouble with it is that's all you do. You make terrible mistakes everywhere else. So that the synthesis should be your second attack on the world, and it's really defensive. Without synthesis, you'll be blindsided in all the other parts of your life that aren't chiropody.
At Berkshire last year, you said that rationality was one of the things that was most important to you. What advice can you give someone who's looking to improve his own rationality?
Well, I'd say if you start working at it young and keep doing it until you're as old as I am, it's a very good idea. It's a very good idea, and it's a lot of fun, particularly if you're good at it. So, I can hardly think of anything that's more fun. And I think I have a lot of cousins in this room, and I can say you're on the right track. It isn't, you don't have to be the emperor of Japan to get fun out of rationality. You can avoid a lot of hopeless messes. You can help other people scramble out of their messes. You can be a very constructive citizen, but you're always rational. And being rational means you avoid certain things. It's like, I don't want to go where I'm going to die. I don't want to go where the standard result is awful. Where is the standard result awful? Try anger. Try resentment. Try jealousy. Envy. All these things are just one-way tickets to hell. and yet some people just wallow in them. And of course, it's a total disaster for them and everybody around them. Another one is just awful, is self-pity. If you're dying of cancer, don't feel sorry for yourself. Just chin up and suck it up and wait through. Self-pity is not going to improve anything, including dying of cancer. Self-pity is just forget about it. Get it out of your repertoire.
I have a personal question for you since you mentioned marriage. Increasingly, men and some women don't find the ROI on a long-term committed marriage worth it. And obviously that, it still means different things to different people in different parts of the world and has for in different periods of time. But I'm curious what your evaluation is of the investment of marriage.
I think different folks can live in different ways, but I think all the evidence is that marriage is the best practical alternative for most people. And the statistics show it. They live longer when you measure happiness physiologically by time smiling and so forth. The married people do that. It isn't, a lot of marriages don't fail, and there aren't more marriages that were made in hell and all that. But considering how difficult the world is, it's your best chance for most people. And of course it should be valued. That's one of the things I like about the Asian cultures. The Confucian idea that family's really important, and friends too for that matter. It's a very sound idea. If we ever lost the family values, we would have one hell of a lousy civilization.
First of all, happy belated 29th birthday, I think it was.
Yeah.
On the decision to purchase the real estate at Logan, Utah. First is deploying that capital elsewhere in the technology business.
We think we're going to be in Logan, Utah for a long time. We've got a very happy bunch of employees there. They like their work, they like their community, they like everything about it. It's part of a business operation. We've got customers that come there. It's a very presentable building. I've never seen it. It's got a river that flows by. Of course, we're glad to own it. We own this real estate. We bought it cheaply. We built it cheaply. It's a nice piece of property. The neighborhood around it is steadily upgraded and gentrified as we expected. There's nothing wrong with owning a little real estate. Our way of getting ahead was not to be real estate operators, but we don't mind owning some real estate as part of the business. It simplifies life.
Do you think a person who can't make money running a New Jersey casino is qualified to be president of the United States?
A person who can't make money
running a casino.
Well, he did make money for quite a while. My attitude is anybody who makes his living running a casino is not morally qualified to be president. I regard it as a very dirty way to make money.
Mr. Munger, what has given you personally the greatest sense of accomplishment? That's question number one. And second is, if you had any advice to give to a younger version of yourself, what would it be?
You know, my family life has been more important to me than the wealth or prominence. On the other hand, I hated poverty and obscurity. I tried to get out of them, and it has given me some satisfaction that I came a long way from where I started. I think most people who come a long way from where they started feel pretty good about it. I think most of the people that finally got on top of Everest, even though they only stayed there for 15 seconds, they're kind of proud of the fact they got up there. And so I think that's good. Cicero used to say that one way to be happy in old age is to remember a lot of achievements in your past. Now, some people say that's too damn self-centered and you should be thinking about God or something, but I agree with Cicero. It's okay to live the kind of a life that you kind of plays with when you're old and look back. What was the other question?
You had any advice?
Well, my advice is always so trite. The good behavior, the being dependable, the morality. It makes your life easier, makes it work better. You don't have to remember your lives, which gets complicated if you're lying all the time. In fact, it gets so complicated, you're sure to fall off and be recognized as a liar. So, sure, I think all the old-fashioned morality works, the old-fashioned discipline works, and the old-fashioned good behavior, and a little generosity. We all know people who, really, people come to the funeral to make sure they're dead. You do not want to be in that crowd. You want to live your life so that some people are actually going to miss you when you're gone. So, just every trite idea. My idea, I think Kipling's If is a great poetry. Kipling doesn't exist in the modern college anymore. He wasn't politically correct. Well, I think Kipling's gift is poetry, and it's great advice. Keep your head when all about you are losing theirs. What's wrong with that? And the quote, be a man, my son. You're gonna be why don't you want to be a man? You want to be some idiot child all your life. Some angry twit. There's so many of them already. There's so much to be gained by never being an angry twit. In fact, I think anger is just, you want to be philosophical. This political situation we all face now, of course it's disgraceful. I love these people. I mean, it's bad that a leading civilization has candidates for a high office, and you know, like those we're talking about. And they're not all in one party. But you don't want to get angry. And after all, politicians have been politicians for a long, long time. And you want to operate constructively, vote constructively, but anger, there's just so much anger in politics now, so much automatic hatred. How can any of us really know whether the United States will be better 50 years from now because we vote Republican or vote Democratic in the next election? Who can tell what the exact mix is between compassion and something else? And so I believe in it. All those things were in the old behavior rules. And by the way, the Muslim behavior rules read a lot like the Old Testament, which of course they copied. Same thing in directly from God that really stole from the Jews.
How do you understand a new industry or a new business you are trying to get into where the dynamics are different? How do you gain deep insights into that specific domain? Then second, what is the relationship between oil prices and economic growth?
Well, that's a simple set of questions. Let me answer the second one first. I don't really know the correlation between bond prices and economic growth. Oil prices. Oil. I think it's obvious that if oil had been a little cheaper and easier, the growth would have been greater than mankind had. And in that sense, if oil gets very expensive and we still need it desperately, it will make life harder. So there is that correlation between oil prices and economic growth. On the other hand, some very peculiar things happen. If you take Exxon and Chevron and so forth, what's happened to make those things good investments over the long term is that the damn price of oil went up faster than their production went down. Now name me another business where you get richer and richer as your production in real units keeps going down, down, down. So not everybody would have predicted that in advance, including most of the economists. So it's a complicated subject, but generally speaking, having a lot of, and there's another trick to it. The people that really have a lot of free energy, like the people in the Middle East, have very dysfunctional economies. They're like a bunch of rich people spending their capital and not knowing how to do anything anybody else wants to buy. Maybe in that sense, having a tougher hand has been good for us. My answer to that question reminds me of my old Harvard law professor who used to say, Charlie, let me know what your problem is and I'll try and make it harder for you. I'm afraid that's what I have done to you. The second question was...
The mental models of how do you understand a new industry or...
Oh yeah, two at once. Well, the answer is barely. I just barely have enough cognitive ability to do what I do. And that's because the world promoted me to the place where I'm stressed. And you're lucky to have you. That's what you want to end up, is stress. You want to have your full powers called for. Believe you me, I've had that happen all my life. I've just barely been able to think through the right answer, time after time after time. And sometimes I've failed.
Last year at this meeting, you had some very pointed comments and concerns about Valiant, and I wanted to know if you had...
Nothing but trouble.
Do you have any updated thoughts on Valiant, and are there any current companies where you have concerns similar to
It probably wasn't wise for me to check myself, but I have no dog in that hunt. I have no interest in the pharmaceutical business. I have no interest in Valiant. It's just you people have come so far as a group. Then to tell you amusing stories about life and make comments about current affairs. In fact, it was such an extreme example of misbehavior and crazy that it was calling attention to it. And it ended up with one of the valued shareholders saying that Warren Buffett was a sinner because he owned Coca-Cola. In other words, I drew retaliation to Warren. By the way, that's a good place. If anybody who's mad at me today, why get mad at Warren? He can handle it. He's a very philosophical man. And it is true that these crazy false values and this crazy excess, it's bad morals and it's bad policy. It's bad for the nation. It's just bad, bad, bad. And there's a lot of it. And of course, a lot of it is in American finance. And there's no question about the fact, in my judgment, that American finance, the truth of the matter is that Claire Wrong, that Elizabeth Warren would not agree with me on many subjects, and I wouldn't agree with her on many subjects. But she is basically right when she says that American finance is out of control and has too much evil and folly in it, and that it isn't good for the rest of us. Both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, not two of my favorite people on earth, are absolutely right on that subject. And to the extent you all see it, because this is not manipulative hucksters trying to cheat other people. And so you all see what goes on in finance, the craziness, the bull, the promotions, the lousy accounting, the crazy trading cultures. It's very bad for all of us that we have this huge overdevelopment of finance, and yet it's very hard to do anything about it. What happened, if you look back to, say, Edwardian England or a little before, and maybe 300 people, males, owned half the land in England. They had nothing to do. I mean, their underbutlers had underbutlers. I mean, and what did they do? They went into the clubs of London and they sat around the card tables and they played the gamble with one another for high stakes. And that's what human nature does when people have a lot of leisure and so on. And fade in, fade out, multiply the wealth per capita of the world by 30 or so. And now we got all kinds of people who are like the lords of England who had all that time to sit around and play cards against one another and enjoy the thrills and pains of gambling. And so we have a vast gambling culture, and people have made it respectable. Instead of betting on horses or price fights, you know, bet on the price of securities or price of derivatives relating to securities. And of course, you bet on athletic contests. We have a huge amount of legalized gambling. And of course, the public market that operates every day with transactions is an ideal casino. And there are a whole bunch of people who want to own the casino and make a lot of money without losing money on inventories or credit risks or any of the other irritating parts of business. Just to sit there and have every night the gold go higher and higher. Who doesn't want to be croupier in a casino? And very respectable people get drawn in it, and they see other people getting rich at it. And there's way, way too much of that in America. And too much of the new wealth has gone to people who are either own the casino or they're good enough playing others in the casino. And I don't think the exaltation of that group has been good for the body politic or for generally. And I am, to some extent, a member of that group in the sense that, after all, I had made my career in surgery, and I'm always afraid that I'll be a terrible example for the youth who think, well, I just want to make a lot of money with soft white hands and not do much for anybody else. I just want to be shrewd at buying little pieces. Even if you do that very honestly, I don't consider it much of a life. Just being shrewd about buying little pieces of paper, shrewd than other people, is not an adequate life, and it's not a good example to other people. And it's the reason that people like Warren and me are A, charitable, and B, we're running businesses. We're not just buying little pieces of paper. So I think that we have something going in our nation that is really very serious and very bad. And I hate to agree with Elizabeth Warren on this subject, but she's right. And I don't see any way of stopping it except with some big legislative change. And you can say, what difference does it make? Well, what happens is, as the cyclicality with gambling and securities and other assets goes on, what happens is the big busts hurt us more than the big booms help us. We saw that when the Great Depression ended and the rise of Adolf Hitler. A lot of people think that Hitler rose because of the Great Weimar inflation. But, Germany recovered pretty well from Weimar inflation. What they did is they destroyed the currency. They just issued a new currency. It's rather interesting. They said, people that got rid of their old mortgages and the inflation will put the mortgages back and they will back our new Reichsmark. And that had worked pretty well, just like it works fairly well in Argentina or someplace, or Italy for that matter. Kind of people do that sort of thing now. What really enabled Hitler to rise was the Great Depression. You put on top of the Weimar inflation the Great Depression, and people were just so demoralized that they were subject to being snookered by a gutter snipe like Adolf Hitler. So I think this stuff is deadly serious, and that these crazy booms should be nipped by people like Alan Greenspan. He's an amiable man, but he was an idiot. He did not make the head of the Federal Reserve, governor of all banking, somebody whose hero is Ayn Rand, who believed in no government at all. It was a very unlikely place to look for correct decision making, and he probably got the kind of decision making we observed. I think he's an honest and amiable man, but of course he just didn't see reality the way it was. A lot of people think that if an axe murder happens in a free market, well, that has to be all right because free markets are all right. A lot of those people are in my party, by the way.
The automobile industry, is it meaningfully different today than it was 10 years ago? And then part two of the question is, does it make sense to have General Motors in the Berkshire portfolio?
Well, the second one, the General Motors is in the Berkshire portfolio because one of our young men likes it. And Warren lets the young man do as they please. Warren, when he was a young man, didn't want any old man telling him what to do. And therefore, he delivers that kind of freedom to his young men. Yeah, that's just the way it is. I haven't got the faintest idea why that young man likes General Motors. It is true. It is statistically cheap, but of course, and it may be protected by the federal government in the end. So it may be a very good investment. But the auto industry is about as brutally competitive an industry now as I have ever seen it. Everybody knows how to make good cars. Everybody. And they rely on the same suppliers. And cars last a long time with very little service. And everybody leases them at cheap rents and has all kinds of incentives. It just has all the earmarks of a very commoditized, difficult, super competitive market. So I don't think the auto industry is going to be a terribly easy place to get rich. And it may actually shrink one of these days. In other words, the culture of everybody having 3 or 4 cars could actually shrink. And so I think the auto industry is not the same. If I were investing in the auto industry, I'd want someplace that I thought was way the hell better competitor than the others. And that's hard to find.
2016 Daily Journal Annual Meeting TimeSaver by IDP YouTube channel.
For most of the oil market's history, there's been some entity enforcing production controls, but today Saudi Arabia has acted more as a baseload producer than controlling OPEC's production. Would you suspect that this will result in a negative impact on the economics of all those related to oil production? Or is the way to bet that eventually some entity will reemerge for production control?
I would not have predicted that oil would reach its present price. And in fact, if you'd forced me to bet, I would have bet that what has happened wouldn't have happened. But it did. So I think it is generally true that with these commodities, you can get periods of extreme high prices, like we have in iron ore, and extreme low prices, like we now have in iron ore. And so I think that commodities can do strange things, both up and down in terms of price. And of course, they have macroeconomic consequences and huge consequences. If you're in Australia, having these commodities go way down is terrible. If you're in the tar sands area of Canada having oil prices go down to where they have now. I don't even know how economic it is to produce tar sands oil at $30 a barrel. My goodness, it's not very attractive. And it may not work at all for many people. You're in a weird period, but I think it's the nature of the human condition that with free markets and stuff like iron ore and oil, you're going to have weird periods of high prices and weird periods of low prices. I've never been able to predict accurately or make money from predicting accurately those swings. We tend to just get into good businesses and then take the bumps as they fall.
Please recommend some books that you've enjoyed lately.
Well, you know, you people send me books, 30 a week. I tend to skim them so rapidly that I no longer develop the joy of reading I used to when I picked a few books of my own to read. So you're ruining my judgment of books. I can't resist reading the damn things when you send them to me. No, I skim a lot of them. I like each one in its way because it's different from anything else I normally do. But I'm no longer a good book source. Well, I've never wanted to tackle problems like world peace. You know, I read enough biography that Carnegie thought he was so smart, so rich, so he thought he could use his money and bring on world peace. And he created the court at The Hague and all kinds of very expensive things. And the ink was fairly dry on his creations when the crazy monarchs of Europe stumbled into World War I, the carnage and the poison gas and the agony and stupidity. And so that was quite demoralizing to Carnegie. So I'm not trying to bring on world peace. I've watched Carnegie try it and I've decided he couldn't do it, I'm going to leave it alone. So I don't take on those big subjects. I like to create dormitories and science teaching facilities and stuff like that. It's a pretty modest activity, but it's interesting to me, and it's easy to do them better than most people do them. And I have no feeling I have any advantage in bringing on world peace, but I think I'm pretty good at dormitories. So I do what I'm good at, and I suggest that all of you do the same thing.
Mr. Buffett stated that he believes income inequality is an issue that needs to be addressed. With Senator Sanders doing his campaign around this issue, and so many people in my generation starting to feel the burn, how would you address this issue, and how would you do something?
Well, that's a very good question because it's so in full corral. We've had Piketty and then Sanders. And my attitude is both Sanders and Piketty are a little nuts. The people who really were passionate about equality and wanted to bring about like government action gave us things like the Soviet Union, with all the deaths and agony and the feedback of poverty they have now in spite of having passed oil resources. And communist China, they got equality. And think of the unnecessary deaths and so forth. North Korea, I mean, I'm suspicious of all this passion for equality that has such bad examples. On the other hand, if you want to look what non-equality brings us, let's just take communist China. Communist China had equality, meaning that 3/4 of the people were dirt poor, subsistence level poor. But they had the advantage of being equal. They were all struggling to get enough to eat to live through. And of course, when they adopted some appreciation private property and more property rights and so on, and what they got was living standards that advanced by a factor of 10 or so, more quickly than anybody ever had, but of course a lot more inequality. You had all these rich Chinese they didn't have before. And I think it was a very good bargain for the Chinese to have. In other words, I don't think Sanders understands this at all. He doesn't want to understand it. He has a religion. He's had it for 30 years. He's a Johnny One Note. It doesn't matter. As an intellectual, he's a disgrace. Now, I think we'd all be glad to have him marry into the family based on his personal characteristics, you know, but as a thinker, he's pretty bad. Now, I don't think he's any worse than some of our Republicans. At least they're crazy in a different way. So, but the equality has one effect in a democracy that Aristotle commented on. People will cheerfully tolerate considerable differences of outcome if they seem deserved. Nobody minds the fact that Tiger Woods has a big income when he's the best golfer that's ever lived. Or find somebody who invents some new wonder for the world, or who is a surgeon that's way better than other surgeons, et cetera, et cetera. But differences in outcomes that are seen as undeserved tend to disrupt democracy. That's why Aristotle commented on it in one of his most well-known observations. And, of course, who is getting the undeserved money in America now? It's a good question. It is not Bill Gates. It is not the people who create the new companies and gamble and win. We don't resent their success. But a lot of the financiers, who may or might do too much of the man talking, I think we have a lot of undeserved wealth that I think causes a lot of envy, and to some extent, well, I think envy is always a bad idea. I think it's also never we're going to have a lot of it. A lot of undeserved wealth in the financial class, in many cases for doing nothing, or acting counterproductive. So I think that fixing the obviously undeserved wealth of a lot of people would be a constructive thing. You take the ordinary investment partnership, which some of you know about run. Not only do they get capital gains on what anybody else would be ordinary income, they don't pay any income tax at all on enormous accretions of wealth, because this unrealized appreciation is gradually shifted to the general partner, and he can take securities out and he leaves the business and not recognize the gain. We have enormous liquid fortunes being made with no taxes at all. Naturally, that's resented. It would be resented even more if people understood it. But it's not very complicated to understand. I think by and large, feeling unhappy with inequality. The inequality is a natural outcome of a successful civilization that is improving for everybody. And all this stuff about the wealth of the top 1% or 10 to 1%. What the hell can the guy do who's in the top 1,000? He has to eat the same food, watch the same television. You know, he has to leave the money to something, usually philanthropy. Is he the main problem we have? He's not really using the wealth very much. And most of these guys are not that interested in politics. People like to talk about the terrible influence of the rich on politics. If you're rich, you realize how little influence the rich really have. We're going to see a lot of people that have a lot of money who are rich and get practically nowhere. So I think these people that are raging about inequality, like Piketty and Sanders, are wrong. But I think the people who say the undeserved wealth deserves some attention, I think they're right, and I think a huge source of the undeserved wealth is coming to the old finance.
You mentioned Wells Fargo earlier and its culture, and the reason why you bought it back in the 80s. Daily Journal Corporation has U.S. Bank as well in its portfolio, which is more culture. But in addition, you have Bank of America, and its culture is a little different. I'm curious if the decision of buying Bank of America was driven by its low price. You also see the compounding, it also is a compounder.
The Bank of America was bought the way we used to buy securities. It just got pounded so hard that it was selling for less than before, way less. And there's a lot in the Bank of America which is sound.
I'm pretty excited about the prospects of self-driving cars over the next 10 to 20 years. It seems like the technology is moving very quickly, but as a Berkshire shareholder, I'm worried about the implications for the entire auto insurance industry if accidents hopefully become a thing of the past. That's good for civilization, bad for the auto insurance business. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, you're right. If all the cars run around without drivers, it won't be bad for Geico. And I don't think it's going to happen very quickly. Yeah. In fact, I think it's going to be quite slow. But I think the auto industry, which always before, the first thing people did when they got extra wealth is they bought more cars. I think that even if we don't get self-driving cars, that culture may be waning. Not so much in the third world, but in places like America.
If you could maybe publish a book list, you can continue writing the books in your personal library for the next 30.
I don't want to be a book recommender. It would be quite time consuming. So I'm afraid you'll have to have another.
I've focused this series on opportunities, and a lot of people here have the opportunity, the ability to do well, but they don't have the opportunity to meet the right people. And Ronald Burkle credits you with giving him credibility when he was attempting to acquire grocery stores at age 30. Who was your mutual acquaintance, and how was Ron Burkle able to meet you in the early 1980s?
Well, the last big, in those days we had a lot of declining businesses, and one of them was trading stamps. And our last big trading stamp culture was the company that Ron Burkle's father controlled. And that's where I met Ron Burkle. It was an attempt to preserve that customer, the last customer we had. I had Ron Burkle. And of course I failed in all activities. And Ron Burkle, on the other hand, left that occasion and did nothing but succeed. So you should ask him.
What's your view on unicorn companies like Airbnb, Uber, Frontier? Do you think those companies at such high valuation can ever go public?
Well, my attitude is that I have a circle of competence, and it does not include correctly predicting which new companies in Silicon Valley or dependent on Silicon Valley are going to succeed. So I tend to avoid this subject entirely and make my way in other fashions. However, I will comment on one thing: manipulated finance. As these venture capitalists, part of the finance industry, the constructive one, these are the people who make their living more honorably than the rest of the people in finance because they're actually allocating capital into businesses. So the venture capitalists are useful members of finance, but they don't escape their shares. And what they've gotten in the habit of doing is creating these rounds of private financing, and each new one is at a higher value, but they just sneak a little clause in saying that nobody who previously bought into the venture gets anything until the new guys are preferred. Well, that is sort of like a Ponzi scheme. It's a disgusting, tricky, dishonorable thing to do, particularly since it's obscured, and of course it's being deliberately obscured. So, welcome. So, even our most reputable part of finance has dirty, sleazy activities creeping in, and it will ever be thus. Large amounts of easy money cause regrettable human behavior. It's Munger's rule.
Apparently, the environment that we invest in right now is very different from when you started. With high-frequency trading, momentum trading, and all that, do you think fundamental value investing is losing relevance?
I don't think fundamental value investment will ever be irrelevant because, of course, you're going to succeed in investment. You have to buy things for less than they're worth instead of more than they're worth. You have to be smarter than the market. That will never go out of style. I mean, that is like arithmetic. It's going to always be with us. Now, as far as high-frequency trading, that is a complicated subject. I think the high-frequency traders of the world, many of whom are personally admirable, honorable people, I think they have all the contribution to the American economy that a bunch of rats do in a granary. They're just sucking some of the resources out for themselves while contributing nothing to the civilization.
You mentioned earlier that you said you change your children with vacations on Stone Island and things like that. Do you have a specific approach to spending quality time with family?
I don't think I want to treat myself as some kind of a wonderful example of family life. I did the best I could, but I have a feeling that they all agreed that there's some imperfections.
Do you think that Coach Saban at Alabama is an intelligent fanatic similar to Sam Walton? Who? The Coach Saban at Alabama.
Coach?
Coach Saban at Alabama.
I don't know anything about coaches.
Thank you.
I'm better about the ballet. She has name a few people I especially admire. Well, of course, there are a lot of historical people I admire. That's one of the advantages of being a reader is you can consort with some of the best people who ever lived. And so that's what I do with a lot of my time. But I admire a lot of people. Take surgeons that get away the hell better than other surgeons and do big volumes. think what a controversy is. You take some actor that gets to be the best actor in the world and moves and entertains a lot of people. And there are a lot of people who are constructive, intelligent, generous, and improve the world for the rest of us. And there are a lot of people who are good examples. And I spent some time, because I was on the Costco board for a long time, with Dan Evans, who was both the senator and governor in the state of Washington. Generally admirable, sensible, high-grade politician. And there's so few politicians like Dan Evans. And we got all these gerrymandered districts and all these crazies on the right, crazies on the left, who like only people like themselves. But when you do find a Dan Evans, you really admire him and like him. And I think there will always be admirable people. And my God, that's what we all want to be, is we want to be admirable. You want to be is the kind of people other people name in their will to raise their children if they die unexpectedly. And a lot of people are doing that. You'll know you're doing something right. People are very shrewd about guessing who will be good at raising their children.
When you were a busy attorney, you mentioned that you sold your most important client an hour a day. And I'm guessing that you spent that time reading and thinking. Is that correct, or did you focus on some other activity?
No, that was my most important client, was myself. You're right about that.
And did you focus on the reading and thinking part, or was there some other activity you did for now?
No, it was reading and thinking. I mean, the beauty of doing enough reading and thinking is that you're good at it. You don't have to do much else.
I was wondering if you could speak to your relationship to fear and whether you conquered it.
Well, generally, I've avoided circumstances which automatically cause reasonable fear. Now, if you want to go hang gliding, you have to select another partner. My son Philip is in the audience. He had a saying when he was young. He'd say, if at first you don't succeed, well, so much for hang gliding. And so I believe in it. I don't seek out fear to get thrills. I don't even seek out the appearance of fear when it's really safe. If it's generally, I'm not a great lover of danger, or even the appearance of danger. So that's not my thing. And I don't think I've felt much fear for a long time. I just lived a long time. I had fears when I was younger, but they gradually melted away. All right, I'm being summoned to a director's meeting. I'll take one more question.
Sunday, my 17-year-old son had a number of boys over to watch the Super Bowl. I got all the right refreshments, including 2 big bottles of Coke, no other soft drinks, just Coke and water. There was hardly any Coke consumed by these young men. And it gave me pause, and I've read some stuff about Coke. Sweetened beverages are on the decline, and some have suggested, there was a Bloomberg article that suggested Berkshire's investment sort of gives Coke management some cover to not really address the future of the beverage business.
Well, that's an easy one. Coke for many decades, the basic product, full sugar Coke, grew every year. It was like an inevitable march of time. In recent years, full sugar Coke is declining. Now, unfortunately, the Coca-Cola company has a vast distribution business infrastructure and a lot of other products. And so, while Coca-Cola as an individual product is declining some, instead of going up the way it always did before, the rest of the businesses are, on average, rising. So I think Coke is still a pretty strong company and will be a respectable investment, but it's not like it used to be when it was like shooting fish in a barrel. I guess that does it.